Today, we have come to the conclusion of a confirmation process that has become so dysfunctional, it looks more like a caricature of a gutter-level political campaign.
Joining us now, someone who knows a lot about the history of gutter-level political campaigns, Jon Meacham, presidential historian. Did we make history over the last several weeks in the animosity, not just partisan divides, but gender divides in this country over the nomination fight of Judge Brett Kavanaugh?
I think we reached historic levels of exacerbation of those divisions, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I find so interesting about Senator Collins' speech is she was voting to confirm a vision of Brett Kavanaugh that had far more in common with Susan Collins than it does with Judge Kavanaugh. If you take the first part of her speech, she was casting him as a centrist, not as a conservative, which flies in the face of the political calculus of the moment. If he were such a centrist, why is the right so determined to have this particular man on the court? And so the real Brett Kavanaugh, one of the questions going forward, because make no mistake, 40 years of American jurisprudence just got a shape today, 40 years. And one of the things that's going to be fascinating is Brett Kavanaugh the Kavanaugh who showed up? Was Justice Kavanaugh going to be the one who showed up and made that partisan cri de coeur last week? Or is it the Kavanaugh that Collins thinks she's voting for? And a lot hangs in the balance in the answer to that question.
Well, Jon Meacham, I mean, you've studied American presidents since the first American president. What do you think? I mean, do you think that a man shows his full stripes under the circumstances Brett Kavanaugh found himself in last Thursday? Or do you think the political life we witnessed before last Thursday is the true man?
I think he's closer to where he was last week than the one Collins wanted him to be, unquestionably. If you look at the world out of which he came, a world familiar to you, it's the conservative legal world of Washington, it's the Federalist Society, it's original intent, it's a very buttoned down, but somewhat radical, actually, legal movement. That in its way is as radical as the living constitution of the left, because if you put your own interpretation of original intent as the central judicial criteria, it is still your interpretation of that original intent. And so I think that we've had this struggle now for 30 years or more. The other thing I think that's important to understand historically, and I think to understand the passions around this, is Republicans, far more often than Democrats, have been disappointed in the people who their presidents put on the court. This begins in 1953 with Dwight Eisenhower, who also put Brennan on the court, Richard Nixon, who had 4 appointments, and except for Justice Rehnquist, they turned out to be far more centrist than the right hoped for, George H.W. Bush and David Souter. The insistence of the conservatives since 1990 has been that we are always going to know exactly what we're getting. And that's at the core of this, I think. And that's who Judge Kavanaugh is, and he shouldn't be apologetic about it. That's who he is, and that's whom the president's appointed, and that's whom 51 senators are confirming. But I wouldn't be distracted by Senator Collins' attempt to turn him into some creature out of the Brookings Institution.
My last question is personal for you. I mean, we don't talk enough about the human beings. And I think I was struck last Thursday by the line from Donald Trump's inauguration speech about human carnage when I watched Professor Ford, whose life has been destroyed since this incident, obviously, who overcame that trauma and testified before the country and the world. And Judge Kavanaugh life will never be what it was before. What do you make of this moment in just human carnage and human calamity? I've had a window that I would trade with anyone on earth into what this has done to the Kavanaughs and their circle of friends and their people who support and love him. And I've had a window into what this has done to women who are survivors of sexual assault themselves. And everyone's gutted.
It's brutal. And it's, you're exactly right. One of the things we have to remember in all these moments is that these aren't caricatures. These aren't cardboard people. They are flesh and blood human beings. Most of the time, they're trying to do the best they can through what phrase I love. George Eliot, the Victorian novelist, talked about trying to do the best you could through dim lights and tangled circumstance, which I've always thought was a perfect way of explaining life itself, but certainly life in the arena. Unquestionably, there are damaged people here, and the process is brutal. I think that's one of the legacies of this. I do think it's going to be harder to get people to raise their hand and go into the arena, and I think that's a tragedy. Unquestionably, though, I think ultimately character is destiny. And again, going forward, what affects all of us is will Justice Kavanaugh be able to put this behind him in a way that makes him a better justice for the next 40 years or so?
John Meacham, thank you for spending.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.